I think the government made it clear before the event that June 12th was going to be where they were going to have the major speech and international dignitaries coming. But for constitutional reasons, the swearing-in had to happen by May 29th for constitutional reasons. I think it was a very low-key event. The president is now traveling today for the OIC meeting on the back of it. But I think in June 12th, when they have the full event, we have an inaugural speech from the president. By then, we should also know who the principal officers of the National Assembly are, because they were voted in the Senate president and also the speaker by then. So we can have a clearer idea where the policy direction of the government is going to be.
So we do now ultimately, in effect, have 2 dates.
Yeah.
29th for the swearing in, and then June 12th for Democracy Day. Speak to me on what you think maybe there. Of course, there are conversations around this, the implication of having 2 different ceremonies, maybe the budgetary, financial implications on taxpayers' funds and all that. What do you consider to be, is this significant at all?
I think it's significant in the sense when the government announced last year that they were moving Democracy Day to June 12th, June 12th has more resonance with a lot of Nigerians in terms of the fight for democracy.
From the Southwest?
Especially from the Southwest. And generally, it was seen as a political move. And so that move was seen, and that has now been done and has been approved by the National Assembly. In the last few weeks, they've approved that. Now, if the government could, they would move the swearing-in to June 12th as well. But
to the same date. But
yes.
That's been very much in the talks, like largely advocated for. It saves money, it saves time, and makes us as a nation look more organized.
Yeah, but you need a constitutional amendment for that. And you also have the situation where if you do that, then the president will have more than 4 years. Because it'll be 4 years and a few weeks.
and a few weeks on top of that.
On top of that, which will lead to all sorts of issues. So I think it was just easier just to do a low-key swearing-in and then have the main event on June 12th.
So June 12th, now we'll wait to hear the president give the ultimate speech that we have been waiting for, and most likely that will give a clear, or hopefully should be the word to use, that will give clear policy direction on what to expect for the next 4 years. Let's take a look back at the last 4 years of the Buhari administration. A lot of Nigerians had their hopes up based on the campaign of change. It was going to be a departure from the norm in the last 15 years of the opposition now, as at that time the ruling party, the People's Democratic Party. For you, what was significant in the past 4 years of the Buhari administration? Did Nigerians see as much change as they hoped they would see?
I think there were 2 things. I think first there was the reality and there was hope. There was hope to see major reforms, especially in the oil sector, in the security infrastructure, and in terms of privatization and in the civil service. And we've seen some, but not enough. And there was the reality that Nigeria from 2014, the economy was moving downwards. Oil price was dropping. You could see that there was a pressure on the currency. The reserves were dropping. And there was always going to be a reality check of what the government could actually do. Because if you look at government revenues from oil, I think in 2013 it was about some $6 billion. By 2015, 2016, it had dropped to $26 billion. That's almost a 60% drop. So those are going to do less. Now, there was a lot of the government was very slow in appointing ministers, which created... It
took about the first 6 months.
The first 6 months to appoint ministers. And that delay does not help an economy that is actually already starting to suffer. And so that compounded the problem. So by the time it got acts together, started getting ministers, getting things in place, we're already moving rapidly to a recession. Now we're out of the recession, but we're not having the kind of high-level growth we need for a country like Nigeria. Now,
your mention of oil earlier reminded me of one of the defenses put forward by the vice president, who said that, unfortunately for them, they had a lot of aspirations, ambitions, clearly outlined policies and plans at that time, but they just so happened to be coming in at the time where the variables were not in their favor. Oil, especially, was down.
He's right, but to an extent, anybody with even a vague notion of economics could have seen by 2014, by summer 2014, that oil price was going down. We already had a devaluation by CBN in that 2018 to try and release pressure on the Naira. So anybody coming in would have realized that we're heading to a situation where there's going to be almost an emergency situation in the economy. So I think they should be better prepared. Yes, it was worse than they thought, but they should be better prepared because the trajectory of the economy at that time was downwards, and everyone could see it.
So it was in your face, kind of. So we've had, based on this now, talked about diversification almost for the last 3 years of the administration. But when you look at the figures and when you look at the GDP breakdown, you still see that we are still very largely dependent on oil. Even the budget that we are still going back and forth on for the year 2019 is still very largely in your face dependent on oil. So let's look at the diversification agenda and prospects of this administration.
The reality is that 90% of government revenues from oil. So even to diversify, you need those oil revenues to fund your diversification program. So that was the first thing. GDP itself, oil is only, I think, between 10 and 15% of GDP. So from a GDP perspective, the economy is diversified away from oil.
By the books.
By the books. But from the exports, export revenue is mainly oil. And, I mean, the government has tried. I mean, there's a focus on agriculture to try and expand, especially since over 80% of the working population get the money from agriculture. And they try to push that agenda, try and reduce, and with variable success. There'll be some success stories. There's more that can be done. And if you look at revenue, if you look at the GDP growth we've had since we come out of recession, it's been led by non-oil sector. The oil sector has, I think, only had about a couple of quarters of growth since we came out of recession. Most times it has been a negative growth in the oil sector. You still have no new oil governance. PIGB has not been passed. You still have disruptions, oil bunkering, and various other things that reduce capex in the oil industry. And it's uncertainty over the fiscal issues in the oil sector has reduced that. So we're seeing non-oil sector growth, but it needs to be stronger, and more needs to be done to attract it.
So if we're seeing non-oil sector growth by the book, but conversely, we are seeing a budget that is largely dependent on oil, is it me, or is there a demonstration of a lack of faith somewhere in between?
There needs to be, you're going to need your oil revenues to fund your diversification into non-oil growth. Because various different government programs, for example, the special economic zones the Ministry of Trade and Industry are trying to put in place, the funding for that is going to come from oil. Your infrastructure, improving the infrastructure, your Lagos-Ibadan railway line, that's rapidly, second Niger bridge, all that's going to come from oil. Once those are up and running, then you can say, okay, you've increased the infrastructure, you can now start, then you can maybe be less reliant on oil. But at the moment, to fund your non-oil diversification, you're going to need oil revenues. And I think that is that disconnect. And I think the government has not done well enough in trying to portray that to the public. That, look, yes, we're trying to diversify, but we need oil in the next 5 to 10 years to pay for this diversification.
So over the next few days now, maybe a couple of weeks, we begin to see outright nomination and listing appointment of ministers to hold different portfolios and cabinet. And much has been in the talks about that. Some have advocated the need for a total cabinet reshuffle, while some say that specific MDAs are not working as they should at the moment. One of the ministries, Works, Power Housing, is like top on the front burner of conversations. It looks like there's a lot being cramped together in one portfolio for one man who seemingly can do the job, but it's a lot to handle for these three, ironically, strategic portfolios. So on what side of the divide would you sit? Should we split or should we continue to maintain? Is the current formula working for you? Maybe that should be the question.
I think it all depends on what were the objectives given to the ministers. Because in essence, you appoint ministers. They pass the Senate screening, you give them portfolios, and you appoint them. You should give them KPIs, key performance indicators. These are what I want you to achieve over the next 4 years. These are how I'm going to judge you. At the end of 4 years, when they're handing over, you look at what they've done and say, okay, fine. Based on the KPIs I gave you, have you achieved them? And if you achieve them, then you can then decide, okay, fine, it's not working. Let's split up the ministry, because it seems that it's too much or it's not working. Or we had the wrong person as minister in whatever ministry and that. But unless we can be more orientated in the sense of how we measure performance and setting targets, then everything is based on what people feel rather than indicators.
What actually
happened
on paper due to measurement.
Because in theory, if you look at some of the stuff, like let's look at Power Works and housing, massive portfolio. But the things, if you look at the stuff that they've done in terms of road construction, reconstruction, they've done quite a lot. They've done a lot in policy-wise, rather than implementation in terms of housing. Done a lot in terms of various other things. And power is the big thing, and everyone looks at the power. But if you look at power, a lot of the issues with power is beyond the power ministry. It's more to do with regulators and the capitalization of the discos and various issues that are away from the power industry, power minister, and what he can actually do. So I think we need to take a more holistic look at what we're trying to achieve and then look at what ministries make sense in trying to achieve that.
So talking about KPIs and having ministers come forward to measure what they actually did achieve vis-a-vis what was instructed for them to do reminds me of the fact that some 3 weeks back, that talk was actually up in the parliament that, okay, the president says, bring in what you have done. Let's see how we can look at this, see if you actually did achieve the set goals, and then that would, in effect, let us know if you're retaining the positions. But we didn't seem to hear any follow-up to that if the ministers did turn in the reports that they were requested.
The thing is, I think it all has to do with information flow. I don't think this government has been very good in the information flow. It's pretty obvious that the ministers had targets. They had things that they were set to do. Now, whether they achieved them, we don't know what those targets are. It's very unclear.
Information flow.
It's very unclear to us what those targets are. So it's very unclear to us to measure what actually they did. Because you might find that some ministers, their targets were, like, for example, transmission might be to start Lagos-Ibadan railway and get it towards completion by 2019. If that was the target, then the minister has achieved that, rightly or wrongly so. But we need to know what those targets are. I think there needs to be more information flow, and I think the president has to speak to the public more and say, look, these are what my ministers are doing. This is what I'm setting for them to do. And it's up to us as a population to follow. These are targets the president has set for the ministers. We as a population will make sure, and we'll follow those targets to make sure they're kept. And then it makes things easier.
So, Kayode, as we await the president's speech come June 12, what would you say are the strategic areas that you're hoping that this administration will focus on?
I think one is security. We can't do much without security. And even if you look at agriculture, the focus on agriculture, the insecurity in the Middle Belt and in the Northeast and Northwest to an extent, in most of the breadbasket areas of Nigeria, is reducing farming. And we can't have strong growth in agriculture without security. So I think the president mentioned in his speech, in his interview, I think on Monday, when he spoke to the Nigerian Television Authority, where he said he's going to concentrate on improving the security infrastructure and the judiciary to try and whether we need specialized courts to make the judiciary faster, whether police needs to be overhauled. We have a situation where in 31 or 32 out of 36 states in Nigeria, the military are involved in internal security. That's not the military's job. The military's job is to fight issues like Boko Haram and all other issues, not to do anti-armed robbery or other issues. We need to rearm the police, reorientate them so they can take over more of the internal security. I think that's one thing. Another thing, we need to look at the oil sector. We need to do the reforms. Whether it is bringing the petroleum governance, look at that. They've been talking about reducing JV, the government shares JV to 40%. That's been going for 3 years. Every budget is 710 billion. We're going to realize from this. 2018 budget, 2019 budget, same number. Let's get this thing done. Let's start looking at the fiscal so we can get more capex involved in the oil industry. I think that's one. And we also have to look at civil service. I'm not talking about basically, you might only have to reduce the numbers because there's certain industries like we need more policemen, we need more teachers. So it's not actually reducing numbers, but numbers we have to make them more efficient. Efficiency in Nigerian civil service is very low for various different reasons. It's not just the workers' fault. They're not given the right equipment. They're not given the right ways to do things. And unless we improve the efficiency of Nigerian workers, then we're not going to go anywhere.
Overall, Kayode, how do you reckon the continuity in governance as Nigeria is obviously seeing it now will impact the economy, say investor sentiment? It
all depends on the president's appointments because he's going to appoint ministers. Some of the old ministers might come back, some might not. There might be some new faces, depends on what portfolios they get. And even some of the presidential, like chief of staff, the national security advisor, various appointments the president makes for his own, within the presidency, he's probably going to make in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And we're going to see, is it going to be the same people? Or are we going to have new ideas, new blood? The service chiefs, I think it's either they're going to get renewed or we look on new service chiefs. So I think it's when we start seeing, and hopefully by June 12th, we'll have a list of ministers, hopefully by then. We'll have a National Assembly leadership, and we'll have more of an idea of the kind of people that are going to populate this government.
Definitely.